Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod here to discuss MSU's upcoming game against the Indiana Hoosiers in East Lansing. Before we begin, a quick reminder to subscribe and like the show if on YouTube or on your podcast player. Please leave a 5-star written review or comment below. I suppose every year, Rod, we have some team in the Big Ten with just disarray, controversy. Last year it was Michigan and the end of the Juwan Howard saga, we'll call it. And this year it has to be Indiana with the end of the line for Rod Woodson experience
Mike
where he
Woodson.
Mike Woodson, yeah, Mike Woodson experience, where he announced last week that he's retiring at the end of the season, avoiding the uncomfortable public firing of a previous hero for Indiana University's AD. It comes, Indiana comes to the game now 14-10 overall, a disappointing 5-8 in the Big Ten. We talked a lot last year about how we both thought that it would be the last year for Woodson, and the Indiana, to their credit, I guess, discredit, decided to stick with him through some various backers, I suppose. And instead of replacing the coach, just threw a big pile of NIL money in order to go out and get some big time talent like Ballo and Tucker. Uh, but as for with previous years, it just hasn't worked out for Indiana. And so this year they come into the game 56 ranking in Ken Palm, 63rd in the net, meaning they're kind of in the bubble somewhere, I suppose, with a lot of games to go yet. But on the court, they've been really pretty much a mess, leading us
It,
to guess that they're just probably going to be outside looking in on Selection Sunday unless something turns around.
well, that's it. I mean, where they sit right now, I haven't looked at updated bracketologies, but given everything, I don't see any way that they're a tournament team at the moment. And so, are there opportunities left for them where they go on a run? Yes, but it's going to be a very tall order, and I would say the odds are extremely low they'll be able to pull it off. It's just you can watch. I watched some of their game against Michigan yesterday, and Michigan. By the time I put it on, the comeback was underway, but Michigan had led by as much as 17 in the second half, and then
In
IU made
Bloomington.
it. Yeah, in Bloomington, right? And IU made a great run. Um, got in it. I mean, they were right there at the under four. I think they were even
Yeah.
at the under
Hmm.
four timeout. And just when it came time to make winning plays, they weren't able to do it at either end. And that's been not that every game has been a tight loss, but that's been the story of their season. You and I watched on our flight out to the West Coast, we watched the second half of their game in West Lafayette.
Right.
Similar story. Right there, and just could not get over the hump. And at some point, that becomes about, I think, it becomes about things like culture and the things we associate with whether a program is a winning program or not a winning program. And IU has not been a winning program for a long time. I mean, you
Yeah.
you really have to go back. This is crazy to say, but the last time it felt like there was real juice around the Indiana program was the 2012-2013 season
Yeah.
when they had an elite team. Remember that year was Indiana, Michigan, Michigan State all had great teams, and Indiana was probably the best of those three in an objective sense. It was close, but I'd say they probably were. And yet Tom Crean, his first great team there, couldn't get out of the Sweet 16. This sounds familiar to people. They lost to Syracuse. They
Yeah.
couldn't handle the zone. Um, and although he won another Big Ten title after that, and he certainly had some competitive teams after that, it never got that good again. And
Yeah.
and that was the first time Indiana had been at that level in probably, you know, 6, 7 years. It's been, and this is hard for somebody my age to really fully grasp, but when you think about it, it's true. You've really got to go back 30 years now to the last point Indiana was truly what I think of when I think of Indiana basketball. Because the last, say, 6 years of Bob Knight's tenure, they were not that.
Right.
They had declined and they weren't bad. They were still in the tournament most of the time, but they weren't what they had been. A team that was perennially in the Big Ten title mix, a team that was seen as a national contender, all of that. So it's been a long time since Indiana has had a winning basketball culture. And Mike Woodson, being a guy who played for Knight, was on a national championship team in '81, all-time great player there. And a guy who, frankly, and it's sad because I think what's happened during this tenure for him is Mike Woodson has largely been seen to be an amiable doofus. And that's unfair.
Yeah.
Mike Woodson had a long career as a very well regarded NBA coach. He did some good things, not spectacular, but was seen as a solid NBA head coach. And he was a great assistant. I mean, look, I think it's universally regarded that despite his quirks, Larry Brown is probably one of the best to ever do it, right? Well,
Sure.
Larry Brown saw fit to have Mike Woodson as a key assistant on his staff that won the NBA title in 2004 as part of the Going to Work Pistons. Mike Woodson was an assistant on that staff and was considered a key guy. So I feel for him a little bit that he took this challenge, I assume, at least in part, motivated by the idea of trying to restore the program back to what it had been when he was there. And it's really damaged the perception of him.
Hmm.
I just feel badly because he seems like a decent guy, and it just doesn't. I feel badly when you see that happen, but it has, and I think he made the right decision. It was truthfully probably the only decision that could be made at this point because, as you said, if he didn't step away, they were almost going to have to fire him.
Yeah.
I mean, he got that reprieve after last season when it clearly looked like it wasn't working. And supposedly Quinn Buckner, who is, I believe, the president of their board of trustees or whatever they call their organization. It might or might not be that. Some schools call it something different, but you get the point.
Yeah.
Buckner backed him and lined up or helped line up all the NIL money that went to pulling this roster together. You mentioned a couple guys, and there are others. They added 3 guards as well.
Hmm.
A lot of money sloshing around that program, but you can never know with certainty this stuff. But it seems likely that IU has a top 5 payroll in college basketball. They're considered to be somewhere near the top. Just getting Ballo ensured that.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
that was a 7-figure deal by all accounts. And it just hasn't worked. I mean, we talked about it in the preseason, how to me, it seemed obvious there were 2 real questions. One would be you're going to now be playing with 2 guys who are both low post players.
Right.
And so what's that going to do? And then you look at the guards they added, and 2 of the 3, I'll exempt Luke Goody from this, were guys that had good freshman years at their previous stops, but they hadn't proven to be good shooters. And so, and IU wasn't bringing back much shooting either. And Tucker was not a shooter as their lone high school addition. So you looked at their roster and you thought, well, how is this going to work? They don't have stretch guys who force a defense to stretch, and they're going to play with 2 low post players. That just seems like a train wreck waiting to happen. A lot of talent on this team, but just a terrible fit. And that's exactly how it's played out for them, unfortunately. So yeah, it's going to end, and we'll have another very interesting and likely entertaining March and maybe April as IU tries to sort out who's next. But you start to, at least for me, you really start to think about this job as something of a poisoned chalice, right?
Yeah. Right.
Because Woodson was a weird choice. Everybody acknowledges that, but the guys they'd selected before that, if you look at it, so we'll go in inverse order. Archie Miller. Archie Miller was for several years where he was at Dayton, was considered one of the hottest names in college basketball. It was seen as inevitable that he was going to move up.
Hmm.
You just didn't know where. And when he finally picked Indiana, that was a big deal. He was seen as pretty much a sure thing. Well, that didn't happen. Before that, Tom Crane. We all know about Tom Crane, ex-Michigan State assistant. Tom Crane had taken Marquette to a Final Four.
Yep.
Was seen as a very good coach, and actually, of all the guys who have had this job post Knight, did the most. I mean, he won 2 Big Ten titles while he was there. That's something. And had some competitive teams, but just could never quite find that consistent level. Never had a real March run. That was, I think, the big problem for him. And I think then the fact that toward the end, he was tilting away from home state kids. I think that alienated the fan base when it wasn't coupled with winning. So it ended for him. Before that, probably a lot of people forget this. They had Kelvin Sampson.
I was gonna say, yeah, I couldn't remember where he was in that order, but
he did some good work in a brief tenure. Problem is, he got in trouble with the NCAA, and for stuff that likely wouldn't be any kind of big deal now, but it was then. And before that, you had Mike Davis, who did take them to a national title game, but as the guy who followed Knight, that was always going to be nightmarish. No pun intended.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, really. And it was. You look back at it, you say, well, Mike Davis did some good things, but it was never going to be enough. And there was enough inconsistency that, that tenure obviously ended. So you've yet to have a guy really settle in and have a nice run.
Who was after Knight, actually? Who was interim? I can't remember his name.
Mike Davis.
Wasn't
Those are the 4
Dan
guys.
Dakich,
No,
wasn't he there?
That was after Sampson.
Oh, he was after Sampson.
That was after
so he was
Sampson
there for a little bit.
We won't even count Dan Dakich. She's not worth mentioning. But those are the guys. Those are the 4 guys. And so Mike Davis was not a name, but the other 3 guys they've had in that job were all people that were considered to be very good coaches, were people that lots and lots and lots of schools would have loved to have had as their head coaches when they took the job at Indiana, and it didn't work long run for any of them. It says something.
Yeah. Well, and Sampson's been successful at Houston now, right? So
he was successful at Oklahoma before that.
Was he Minnesota as well, or was that Clem Haskins?
No.
I'm thinking
he was at Washington State, where he did a good job. Yeah. And then Oklahoma, where he did a very good job. Michigan State beat him once in the tournament when they had the Nahara kid from Mexico.
Yes, right.
And then he took the IU job. That didn't work. Went to the NBA for a while in purgatory because of the violations, and then landed in Houston and has been spectacular there in a late career renaissance. But that's my point. Indiana, all 3 of those decisions prior to Woodson, at the time they hired those guys, were seen as excellent choices.
Yeah.
Like they weren't reaching, they weren't going off the board where you're like, what the hell are they thinking? No, those were all reasoned, strong decisions where people thought they had gotten the right kind of guy, and it just hasn't worked. So at some point, they got to get it right. I mean, law of averages would say they're going to land somebody where it's going to work. But it's going to be really interesting to watch that unfold, as it always is in those hunts, because despite all of what I've just laid out, I still think Indiana is a great job.
Yeah.
For the right guy. Everything you need is there. It comes with pressure. So there's a basketball first school, which it still is, despite the football team's success this year. That's that you're in a fishbowl, and it's hard. Mike Woodson can attest to that now, but it's still a place that I think rates among the best jobs in the country. But you got to be what the recent past, or not so recent past now, has proven is it's not turnkey. It's not anybody can come in and win at this job. It's a place where it's got to be the right guy.
Yeah,
which is most places.
They certainly have the resources and the support to be successful if you can pull it off. Yeah, you wonder what level is the coach or just the institution that's the problem. Whether it's the athletic department or maybe there's so many people
I,
invested in it, they have their own sort of factions and they sort of undermine the other faction. I don't know, but what the problem is.
well, yeah, I mean, I don't, I'm sure there's factionalism as there usually is, and but that probably happens. I've never heard, and maybe I'm missing it, but I've never heard about stuff like equivalent to what happened in Michigan football when Rich Rodriguez took that
Right,
job, and
right.
there were
Yeah.
people actively trying to undermine. I've never heard about that. That maybe there was some of that during Mike Davis's period. I don't know. That would have made some sense. But I think after that, I don't recall hearing a lot about that. I think it's just been one of those things,
Yeah.
um, where it just hasn't worked, and that's the deal. It's we talk about it all the time with players, right? With portal guys. Hey, just because you did something in one place doesn't mean it's going to automatically transfer to the
Exactly.
next one. It can be true of coaches too.
Sure. Well, it'll certainly be an interesting offseason, and I'm sure a lot of Michigan fans are sweating it out because
Yep.
whatever happens with it, I'm sure they'll sign an extension. There'll be extra money going towards Dusty May, but will that be enough? And
Well,
I think there's no way to know at this point what it.
interesting that you raised that because I watched his post game and he said the things that you would expect anybody to say. But you know what word he didn't say?
I love Michigan.
Well, he no, he said that. He didn't say no.
Oh,
If
interesting.
you watched it, he did not say, "Look, I'm flattered," but he did say he was flattered. But he didn't say, "I'm flattered, but I'm not interested in the Indiana
Yeah.
job." He didn't say that. And he strikes me as a savvy operator kind of guy. So I'm not surprised. That doesn't mean he's going to take it. It doesn't mean he's even top of the list for Indiana. You hear a lot of people like Scott Drew mentioned.
Yeah.
Chris Beard's name is mentioned, although I just struggle with the idea of that given his history with the domestic
Hmm.
abuse charge. I just can't see a. There's a reason he got the job at Ole Miss and not a Big Ten school. Let's put it
Right.
that way. But there are other names kind of bouncing around. But man, if I were a Michigan fan, I wouldn't be thrilled with that press conference. Let's put it
Yeah.
that way.
Well, let's talk about Indiana's their team. They're number 65 on offense this year, which means they don't have anything that's really a strength. They're just kind of like okay or kind of middling in everything. They're not a great 3-point shooting team, as you mentioned before, shooting only 32% for the year for the conference, and which is the same in the conference, so it hasn't improved. They're number two, and from two, they're 110th nationally, which is also not very good. They turn the ball over a lot. They're 187th in turnovers. They're not a very good offensive rebounding team at 108. They're 162nd in free throw rate, so they don't get there very often. And when they do, they only hit 72% from the line. So as you mentioned, it's kind of a strange offense that you have two bigs, Ballo and Renew, who kind of have to play together. And for as much as people complain about Michigan State before the season, that they struggle with the five, not having good scoring, not having anything on the inside. Indiana almost is the reverse, where they have too much on the inside, where it kind of clogs things up, and especially when you don't have people who can shoot outside, it becomes sort of semi dysfunctional or offense.
And somehow, despite having two guys who would each be seen as very good low post players, they're not even that great from two.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's just, it was, I always use the phrase, it's not a video game, right?
yeah,
Indiana is the epitome of this. In the real world, the parts don't fit. And the fact that they're even as mediocre as they are offensively is mostly a testament to the individual talent they do have on this roster. Like that's the only reason it's even that good
right.
because they don't shoot the three well. They can't space the floor. Everything's clogged when both guys are healthy, which Renault has missed some time this year, which ironically is when I think they looked the best. It was true yesterday in the Michigan game. In that when they made their second half run, they were playing one or the other of those two big guys, not both simultaneously. Geez, you think? I mean, it just seems it just seems pretty obvious, but it hasn't been for Indiana this year. And Yeah, they don't stand. There's no one area of that offense that stands out as a strength. Even some teams we talk about that are not good at that end will often have at least one thing like, yeah, they do everything else badly, but they do get to the line,
Right. Yeah.
something like that. Or, they can't throw the ball in the ocean, but they offensive rebound.
Hmm.
You know, nothing like that for Indiana.
So on defense, a little better. They're number 78th and opponents getting the foul line, so they don't put people on the line very often. Uh, Defensive rebounding is not great. They're 115th against the three. They're 138th. They're 165th against twos. So really not great numbers. And then also, despite having a couple bigs, they do play kind of fast. Their tempo is 118th with an average length of possession on offense of 90th. So they play a little on the fast end, but
Normally,
defensively slow.
yeah, and normally, speaking to pace, I'm a proponent, as I think most people are, playing fast is more entertaining to watch, and oftentimes it can be more effective.
Hmm.
But this is a team where I almost feel like they're playing too fast. Not that they have like crazy bad turnover numbers, but they're not good. And I also think getting in a fast-paced game, they're not an athletic team particularly. You look at two big guys, and Ballo in particular is out of shape. He doesn't move well.
Yeah.
Their guards don't wow you. There have been years where Indiana's had some good athletes in recent seasons, but they don't really have that. There's nobody on that team that really pops as an athlete. And I think it's hurt them at both ends. But my feeling would be, hey, maybe they should slow it down a little bit. Um, but then you get to some other weaknesses, and it's hard to know if they would actually be any better. Uh, but yeah, it's defensively they're not great either. Not connected, um, not particularly sharp in how they execute defensively at times. So it's overall, it's just not a great picture for this team. The numbers tell the story, and when you delve into their profile, it becomes pretty easy to understand why they are where they are.
Well, they're 4 games above 500 overall. They're have 7 games remaining in the regular season. There's a reasonable chance this team, especially with the departure of Woodson, they kind of feel like the team that might end up below 500. But as we said before, with the Big Ten, the nice thing is if you have a chance to get, to build your resume with plenty of opportunities of good wins, just this team certainly doesn't feel like the type of team that's going to pull that off.
Yeah, the theoretically the chances are there.
Yeah.
But the reality is that it's just hard when you watch them. It's just hard to envision them going on a run. As I was saying about these recent games against Michigan and Purdue, they've got just enough talent to make it interesting, but it doesn't. The whole thing doesn't hang together well enough to get wins.
We'll then come to the opposing lineup brought to you by the Brothers Adjust Your Gutters, who sponsor the player that Michigan State needs to keep in the gutter for this game. And friends, if you've got gutters, which if you live in the state of Michigan, you've got gutters. So make sure those gutters are functioning properly, especially with the snow melt, rain coming soon here in the spring. Make sure that they're cleaned out of all the junk from the leaves and sticks and things like that. Or maybe you're like me and had a tree growing in your gutter. So the brothers can go get up there on the ladder so you don't have to. Clean those out. They can put leaf guards on so you don't ever have to get on a ladder. They can also fix things if you have leaky problems or don't have enough gutters like me. You can have them fix those up as well. They can replace, repair, whatever needs to be done. They can do it, and they just do gutters. So they specialize only in that. They're not going to try and sell you other stuff like windows or anything like that. They're just going to do gutters. They do fantastic work. And as a listener to the show, you get 10% off. You mentioned Final Four when you get your estimate. You can find ways to contact Greg or Kurt, whether you're on the east side or the west side of the state of Michigan, just by heading on over to our support page at tffinots.com/support. So beginning with the starters, and Miles Rice, 6'3" sophomore transfer from Washington State. He's expected to be a pretty big addition. He's averaging 11.1 points a game on 44, 31, 89 shooting, pulls down 3 boards a game, and has second the team with assists at 71. But unfortunately, he has 59 turnovers, so almost barely better than 1-to-1 assist turnover ratio.
People were very high on the two guards they added, Rice being one of them, the other Keenan Carlisle, who we'll talk about when we get to the reserves. They're very high on these additions. Both of them were coming off freshman seasons, so they could potentially be multi-year additions, which is nice, and had strong seasons in the Pac-12. But there were some signs. Neither one of them was a great shooter as a freshman, a great jumper.
Mm-hmm.
And neither one of them had really shown that they were actually point guards. And I think that's all the weaknesses, or at least the question marks, have all borne out. Rice has been okay, double digits in scoring, it's not terrible. And his shooting hasn't been like abysmal, but it's not great, 31%. He's not a point guard. He's second on team assists, but he's close to being a one-to-one assist to turnover ratio. Hasn't been a world beater defensively. I mean, it's just, Indiana guard play has been something that I've found myself talking about as a negative for years and years and years. Really, for the entirety of the Arch Miller tenure,
Yep.
and for most all of the Woodson tenure. You got to go back to Tom Crean to find, when he had Yogi Ferrell, guys like that,
Right.
where there was good guard play at Indiana on a consistent basis. It's been a long time. And I don't think Indiana solved that this year.
Yeah. Well, certainly they were known for the guards for a long time. You have Steve Alford, you've got Isaiah Thomas, right. I mean, some fantastic guards.
Knight consistently had great, even when you mentioned the superstars, but there were years where you look at Indiana in the preseason and think, boy, I don't know where it's going to come from. And then somebody like a Joe Hillman would all of a sudden step up and have an all Big Ten. I mean, he had a knack. Even somebody like Dakich was an effective defensive player, He had a knack. He understood guard play at a really high level. And because he ran a motion offense, it was a little bit unique there compared to a lot of other places where it wasn't necessarily where we have a defined point guard and then we've got two off guards. It wasn't that way. He developed multi-skilled, versatile players who could do a lot of things well. And boy, it's been absent for a long time.
Then moving on to Anthony Leal, 6'5" senior, who's been on Indiana his entire career. He's sort of a glue energy guy. He's only scoring 3.1 points a game, averaging 17 minutes. He does shoot well, 57, 50, and 59, but obviously very low volume for those to only average 3 points a game.
Yeah, he's in his fifth year, and this is the first year that he's really had a regular role. He was never able to break through prior to this. And the primary reason for that, was twofold. One, he was recruited as a shooter, and up until this year, he never really shot particularly well. But he also struggled defensively. So, you put that aside, it's a great picture, right? But this year, you said it, he plays with some energy, and they've needed that. And so his role has actually increased as the years gone along. He isn't a volume shooter, so the efficiency numbers look great, but it's not resulting in a ton of production. But he's in there for a reason. It's because he's just playing harder.
Yeah. Then we have Mackenzie Mabako, 6'8" sophomore, averaging 13.3 points a game, 5 rebounds a game, shooting 46, 34, and 88. He is, I think, been pretty good from the 4 spot. He was, in the 3. He had a pretty good game against Michigan, but he's a guy who can get hot from outside if you're not careful.
A lot of talent. He was an elite recruit. Just to remind people, he was committed to Duke, and then when Duke last year had a few guys like Filipowski decide to come back, surprisingly, for their sophomore seasons, he decided to jet, got let out of his letter of intent, and ended up at Indiana. And it looked like kind of a weird fit last year because it wasn't obvious that there was going to be a spot at the 4. So he had to play the 3 a lot. And he did okay. He actually had a really strong close to his freshman season. And so I think there was a feeling that, okay, he's going to step up and become like an all Big Ten level player as a sophomore. But with the roster moves Indiana made, he had to play the three again. And in fairness to Woodson, I get the sense that Mbako thinks he's a three.
Uh-huh.
He's not. He's a four. And so while the season has not been terrible, and as you correctly state, in any given game, Mbako could go off for, 25 and 10. Like he's capable of doing that at any given point. But consistently, the performance has not been there. It has not been a step forward. If anything, maybe a slight step back, slight. And I think a lot of that is because of the domino effect of their roster decisions, that he's playing the three where he's not able, it doesn't play to his strengths
Yeah.
as a player. If you're playing him as a four-man in the college game, I think he becomes a real weapon. At the three, it's not the same deal. He doesn't have the same advantages.
Then we have Malik Renault, 6'9", 230-pound junior. He's had some injury issues this season, but he's back and playing pretty well. He's averaging 12.3 points a game, 5.4 rebounds a game, shooting 54, 14, and 73 in just 19 games. So I think they expect a little bit more out of him. But again, you've talked about it, kind of everyone's playing a little bit out of position on this team right now.
He's the guy, as much as anybody, who I think has been really screwed by Indiana's personnel decisions. I really liked Malik Renault last season. Again, like Mbako, especially the way he closed the year. I just thought, man, I don't know if there's a better, more efficient low post scorer in this league at the end of last season than Malik Renault was. And you could see this coming. Like he said, look at those 3-point numbers. He's not a stretch four. That's
Right.
not his game. Okay. So he's got to play inside in order to get the best out of him. And then you've added another post player who's going to demand the ball, who's going to clog things up. It just doesn't work. I hope for his sake, if he decides to come back to Indiana, and with the coaching change, who the hell knows what happens. But if he is to stay there, I just pray to God that whoever comes doesn't insist on adding another center.
Yeah.
Let Malik Renault play the five, you know? Or if you add a five, make sure it's a stretch five.
Sure.
You know? I feel for him because I think he's potentially a really good player, and he's not having a great year. The injuries haven't helped, but I think it's more than that.
And finally, the guy we keep talking about who sort of has thrown things out of kilter for all these positions is Omar Ballo, 7-footer, 275-pound player from Arizona last year, started at Gonzaga. He was the guy, as you mentioned, for probably seven figures as far as NIL deal, leading the teams in scoring at 13.7 points a game, almost 10 rebounds a game, 1.5 blocks a game, shooting 65% from the floor, only 58% from the line, takes about 5 free throw attempts a game. So, it's hard to know if he's a positive addition for the team because he just has changed things quite a bit. I mean, obviously he's a splashy player. He was like the number one transfer everyone is excited about, but has it fit well? I guess that's a real question.
I don't think there's any question that it's been
Okay.
that negative. I mean, look at the wins and losses, right?
Yeah.
That tells the story. If a guy is brought in, paid that much money, and the implication clearly is, okay, this is a guy who's a transformative player for us. He will make us better. Well, they've been worse than they were last year, I think. I think you can make
Yeah.
an argument for that. And so on that level alone, then you start talking about with him, well, it's not just what he's doing. It's the domino effect of what it does to all the other guys on that team. And I think that's a pretty easy thing to argue that's been negative. What it's done to Malik Renault, what it's done to Mackenzie Mbako. This is, then you add in on top of that, and it's hard to know all the details, but I don't know if you remember, and I can't remember whether you were on the show yet or not, but a couple of years back, leading into his senior year, Trace Jackson Davis, who I had a lot of respect for. I thought he was a really good player. Obviously, a kid MSU recruited, heavily wanted in the program, almost came here. he did an interview heading into a season where he talked about how things needed to change. And it was pretty obvious that what he was talking about is that there was an inmates running the asylum kind of scenario.
Yeah.
And if you remember, Dane Fife was on my
Right.
staff the first year, and then he resigned, was let go, whatever it was, under mysterious circumstances. And I heard stories about what that was. I can't verify um, the veracity of those stories, but I got reason to believe it because they seem consistent with who I'm aware these people are. And if they were true, it said a lot about the inmates running the asylum bit, right?
Yeah.
So that's all background. You bring in Ballo, and Ballo sat out. I don't think he was suspended. He sat out a game, didn't play earlier this year. And there
Yeah,
were
that's right.
rumors that he had been drunk. Um, there were also rumors that it was just a reaction to him being lazy, not working hard, which is clearly evident when you watch him play. Like he is not in good shape. He didn't get himself in condition to play this season. It's like the worst case scenario. What happens to somebody when they get a big paycheck? Like that's what you've
Right.
seen with Ballo. Look, the kid has a lot of talent. The numbers tell you that. Like he's good enough that even half-assed, he can walk out there and produce some for you. But I just think and what the effect is of having somebody like that on your team and in the way he's on your team with the NIL, with all that, the implicit messages that come from that, what that does to the rest of your team in terms of its mentality, I just think it was a disastrous decision.
Yeah.
Absolutely disastrous, you know. And you got to wonder. I mean, I didn't spend a lot of time delving into it, but Arizona is a pretty competitive basketball program, and I don't know that I don't recall hearing that they put up a huge fight to keep him, despite the fact that he'd been pretty productive there.
Yeah.
So you got to wonder, was that a situation where Arizona looked at and said, eh, yeah, maybe we could get in the game here financially to keep him, but maybe it's better if he goes.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know that, but I just think it's such a weird situation because you can look at his numbers and say, well, this is a guy who's producing some for you. He's doing some good things, but there's so much else around it that's negative that I just got to believe if Mike Woodson had to do it over, he'd rethink it.
Yeah. Sure. Well, Sparky Anderson, I think, famously said that if you want, I can get you a World Series every year if you can give me a bunch of players all in the last year of the contract. So that
Uh,
kind of sounds. So moving on to reserves, Trey Galloway, who started most of the year at point guard, but now he's coming off the bench. 6'5", COVID senior, averaging 7.6 points a game, leads the team in assists with 96 to just 58 turnovers, shooting 42, 33, and 62. I feel like that's better shooting than usual, at least from beyond the
um,
three. But he is one of those streaky guys where he'll miss like 10 and then he'll hit three in a
yeah,
game. And
it's
he's
a
a big energy guy. Generally, it's what I always remember him as.
it's a slight uptick from last year, but basically he's in his fifth year. His
Yeah,
third season, he was 40% plus from three,
yeah,
and
yeah,
then all the rest have been 20% until this year, where he's slightly above 30. He's never been other than the one freak year, he's never been a good 3-point shooter. I was high on Galloway until this year, but I've heard some things, read some things that maybe his focus isn't where it should have been as a fifth year leader for this team. I don't know if you can put it all on him. I don't have enough of an understanding of their internal dynamics, but um, it's interesting that he's not starting anymore.
hmm
Um, he is a guy who plays with energy at times. He is capable of making big plays, but the consistency in terms of production has not been there. The other thing that's not fair to him is for a lot of his career, definitely the latter half, he's been forced to play on the ball a lot. And I never felt he was really a point guard. So that's been a
Right.
little fair to him.
So then moving on to Bryson Tucker, name a lot of fans, listeners to the show would recognize since we talked about him a number of times before when it came to recruiting for Michigan State. He's a 6'7" freshman who's sort of enigmatic high school career where he's all sort of all over the place, didn't play. He's kind of plays for various clubs and then stops playing for those clubs, whether he's going to go pro right away or if he's going to go to college. He ended up at Indiana. He's averaging 5.8 points a game, 3.1 rebounds a game, shooting 38, 15, and 72. So he's got a lot of good innate athletic abilities, but he's not really been producing great on the court.
This was one that I did not remotely understand when it happened, when he committed there. The story with Bryson Tucker, so he played at 4 different schools in high school, didn't play AAU. His dad is a former player at NC State. And so it was one of these scenarios where, it was kind of a trainer situation. Those don't tend to work out well, certainly
Mm-hmm.
for Michigan State. We've got a couple of those. Marcus Taylor was one. I actually think Marcus Taylor's 2-year career at MSU was pretty good. But, the fact that he left earlier than most thought he would, and he didn't have a pro career that people thought he would when he was in high school, that started raising some people in retrospect looked at it and said, maybe this wasn't the right path. And then Amani Bates had some of that stuff too, and he never actually got here. So
Right.
that's an equation that right out of the chute would have you wondering. And then just a lot of his father, not so much the kid, but his father just had a tendency to say a lot of preposterous things. So it it never looked to me. I honestly I couldn't understand why Michigan State was in it. And then the way it ended, where they really weren't in it at the end, I think spoke volumes that they must have. I know this. Tom Izzo is an eternal optimist when it comes to this stuff. And if he likes things about the kid and about his potential, he will believe that he can find a way to unlock it and reach the high end of who that player and person can be. Like he's done that many times, and he's done it often enough that it's worked. So look, AJ Hogarth,
Yeah.
example of that, right? And it just in the end, 4 years was enough. It just didn't quite work. Um, but there have been a lot of examples where it went the other way, where he took a gamble and it did work. So I guess I get it on that level, but just on the surface, it just did not make any sense. So Tucker it was supposedly Michigan State, Kansas, or pro. And then Michigan State was out and Kansas was out. And he ended up in Indiana kind of out of the blue. And I looked at it and thought, well, isn't he very similar to Mackenzie McBacco, except McBacco is already there. Got a
Right.
year of experience on him. So he's not walking into a start. Oh, and they got Malik Renault. So he's not going to
Right.
start 4. He's not walking into a situation where there's an immediate big role. Why would he do that, given that this always looked like a one and done kind of plan? Um, I don't understand it, but maybe NIL was part of that. I'm not sure, but uh, he's struggled. Occasional flashes of brilliance. He's a talented kid. Like he's 6'8", got a good handle. He's athletic, got some wiry strength to him. Like you could see the tools, but he can't shoot. Couldn't shoot in high school. Still can't shoot at Indiana. What'd you say? 14%, 15%?
15. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. He can't shoot yet. And that's going to have to happen if he's ever going to be an NBA player. I mean, that's stating the obvious. And I think
Right.
what's been seen this year is he's got a long way to go before that's going to happen. So that it'll be interesting. I mean, with a coaching change, it won't be surprising if he ends up somewhere else. That's kind of par for the course. And then, you just don't know what's going to happen. But I think it's another addition that really hasn't worked. And I have heard that, not remotely shocking to me, that his dad's been kind of a problem behind the scenes.
Well, moving on to Luke, the E is not silent. Goody, 6'6" senior transfer from Illinois, coming back to his home state in Indiana. He's averaging 8.7 points a game and 2.8 rebounds a game, shooting 42, 41, and 91, with most of his shots like three quarters from deep.
Yeah, he's still a good shooter. Not a surprise. Um, this was another one, and it may say something about Illinois too.
Sure.
Out
Hard to know. Yeah.
there, the Brad Underwood merry-go-round. Um, but it hasn't. I feel for Luke Goody because he is the things that I've heard about Indiana is he's one of the few guys on that team that really cares. And you see it when you watch him play.
Yeah.
Like he's always been a high effort, high energy guy. Izzo recruited him hard, wanted him at Michigan State out of Fort Wayne. So he's a guy you could have imagined being part of Michigan State's program in terms of his mentality. Uh, I've been surprised a little bit that he hasn't been able to make a bigger overall impact. He shot the three well, but at Illinois, he played with a lot of toughness. You can see, okay, he's a good wing rebounder. He can get in a stance and play some defensively. Like he was a good all around player for them. That other stuff hasn't translated as much this year for Indiana. The 3-point shooting has. But it's disappointing, I'm sure, for him to come back to his home state for his fifth year and just have it go the way it has, despite the fact that he's given everything he's got to give.
And then we go to K9 Carlisle, 6'3" sophomore transfer from ACC powerhouse Stanford. He's not had a great season. He's only averaging 4.6 points a game on 29, 22, and hit 33 shooting. And he's been injured a little bit too, but I don't know. It's been a rough year.
He was healthy again for the Michigan game. Did not play. I'm not sure whether that was out of caution or just, hey, he's not playing well. He started some early in the year, and then it has not come together for him. And again, same deal as with Rice, but even worse. This was a guy who put up good numbers at Stanford, was seen as a very good addition to the portal. I was a little skeptical. I said, well, but he didn't shoot well, and Indiana needs shooting. And he's not really a point guard, and they could use one of those. You remember what's gone on this year? Honestly, it can't believe I'm going to say this. It makes me think, boy, if they could just get Xavier Johnson back, they'd be so much better. I spent 3 years talking about how Xavier Johnson was the king of empty stats. And yet he would look a lot better than some of these guys. But yeah, Carlisle, it just hasn't worked. And much like with Rice, you wonder, he's got 2 years left.
Yeah.
And a coaching change and all that, might he opt to, move on, go somewhere else, get another fresh start, see what happens.
And finally, with Langdon Hatton, 6'10", 240-pound transfer from Bellarmine. Not playing much. He's only averaging 7 minutes a game in 17 games. But maybe in this game he might play a little bit. He's averaging 2.2 points a game, 1.7 rebounds a game, and shooting 55% from the floor and 76% from the line.
Yeah, he's an emergency big backup. Normally, especially with Renault back, it's of that nature. They've got the two bigs that can handle most of the minutes inside. But in a game against Michigan State, given the physicality and that Indiana, will foul you, I could see a scenario where maybe he ends up taking a turn or two out of necessity. That's possible. But not much of an impact. Just a
right,
body, basically.
All right, so this is actually, it'll be interesting too. So who do you think Michigan State should be focusing on to keep in the gutter for Indiana?
It is a tough call because, Ballow's the leading scorer.
Right.
I know that Renault's capable of going off in any individual game. I'm going to go with Mubako, though. I think he's the most versatile guy, and he also does, even though I don't think he's a good fit on the wing, he creates an issue, certainly for MSU starting lineup, because of his size. So this is a game where I could see them going with a lot of Cohen Carr. We didn't see Cohen Carr for a lot of minutes in the Oregon game, but I think we will in this one. And and we'll probably see a bit of Frankie Fiddler too.
Sure. Yeah, and I guess we still don't know as far from a health standpoint who's going to be playing and who's not. I mean, this whatever this illness is could be sweeping through the team. You
Yeah,
may have players who played last game and don't play the next
it's
one,
a
or
good
vice
point.
versa, right?
We'll return to that in the keys, but you're
Yeah,
absolutely right.
right. All right. Okay. So then moving on to Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. Friends, if you have windows, which I hope you have at least a couple windows in your house, make sure they're nice and clean. You can see up the outside now that the sun is coming out and spring is on the way. Make sure you contact the pros to clean those windows because let's be honest, you're not going to get a ladder. You're not going to clean those windows yourself. Certainly not the screens or the insides. I know that's the case, right? So make sure you have the right people do it. Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids, great pricing, super great professionals, very friendly, and they will meticulous and take care of things. They'll come out to your house and take care of that. Or maybe if you got a rental unit or something like that, or a business, they'll also clean those as well. High rise, they can do anything. They even do the state capitol, so they can do any job, big or small, and take care of those windows for you. Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids, large area, not just Grand Rapids. It's much bigger than that. So contact them. They should be your first call when you're looking to get windows clean, or maybe a power wash your house. Or in the next month or so, they're still doing some interior painting. So if you have a room that you picked the wrong color and your wife's upset, and you need it fixed up, have them come in and do that for you. And as a listener to the show, you get 15% off if you just mention Final Four when you get your estimate. You can find that at the Final Fours on theschedule.com/support. A link to find for that. All right. So who cleans the glass best in this contest? It is a runaway right now. You're up 12-7. I need to really start hitting the boards hard, I guess, I guess you'd say. And I do get to pick first this time, which is maybe helpful. So I'll go with Kohler, who is all you needed last game. So I kind of doubt he's going to have another double, but I'll go with Kohler since
Well,
maybe he's back.
he's had 6 of them.
Yeah,
Oh, I wouldn't rule it out.
I
Uh,
need it for him.
I'm going to go with Coop, who's been rebounding very well of late and playing a lot lately.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with Cooper. And the second choice is tough. I'm always more willing to take Zapala than you seem to be. And Zapala had, I think, 6 boards. In
He did. That's the most he's had in a long time, I think.
yeah. But I just mentioned, I think the game for Cohen Carr to play a lot out of necessity with the defensive matchup. So I'm going to go with Cohen Carr as my second choice. So I'm going to go Coop and Carr.
I feel like you throw me red herrings all the time just to throw me off. So, but
You think there's
something like psychological warfare here. Like,
the things I'm saying?
yeah.
No.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right. Yeah. I know how you lawyers work. Yeah. You're always trying to trip us up. So I'm going to go with Zapala here. I do think he's going to he's going to get a lot of work with Renault and Balo. So I think
That's
he's going to get
crazy.
a decent amount
Right.
of minutes there too.
Because of IU size. Absolutely.
Yeah. So we'll see. I mean, it's outside of Kohler. I think he's the only solid, reliable person to get 5 or 6 every game, even when he doesn't play many minutes. So, all right, I got to at least cut to 4. Otherwise it's going to be, dire straits, pretty much over if I don't get this one. So, all right. So moving on then to the keys of the game brought to you by Nudge Printing. I don't know if I've worn this on camera yet, but this is a really cool full zip hoodie. Super comfortable again. I always say that, but it's true. They're like the softest, nicest things to wear. And it looks great, warm. This is actually perfect for today's weather. So for Super Bowl Sunday. So head on over to Nudge Printing. You get really cool stuff like this. Not the exact thing, because of course it's our logo shirt, but they have all kinds of other ones for Michigan State gear and other schools as well. So if you want to check out for something for Albion or Western Michigan, Central Michigan, one of those other schools, head on over to Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com. 20% off if you type in Final Four at checkout. You can get all this great stuff. And again, they've sold about everything, including some stickers and stuff for like fatheads for your wall or whatever. Great stuff, great Spartans, and they have all the different logos, really cool stuff like hats and things like that too. So head on over, you won't regret it. And they take care of all the shipping. It's perfect. All right. So first key to the game is the weight. I'll just let you go and just explain this one.
Um, well, I think that Michigan State has done a very good job of not letting this quest for 354 for Tom Izzo kind of obfuscate or overwhelm the the things that are at hand that really matter most, which is winning games, competing for a Big Ten title,
Right.
looking to get a high seed in the tournament, all of that. Getting the win yesterday, we're recording this on Sunday, so getting it yesterday afternoon against Oregon to tie after missing on the first two chances to do that out west, I think was really important. And boy, the fact that it all came together the way it did was interesting. That wasn't planned, but that it coincided him tying the record with the 25th anniversary celebration of the 2000 team. Then you have Jace Richardson having the game he had in front of his dad. You have a massive comeback. Like all of those things just kind of coalesce to make it. I mean, you were there. Didn't it kind of feel like a senior day kind of thing? I mean,
It did feel just different. Yes, I think just the nature of the way the game unfolded, I think
it,
played a lot into that. You know, that they're down so big, and then they had just a monster second half, and then yeah, the fight. You know, the obviously the national championship team was sitting there too, and it was the reunion day, so all those players. It definitely felt senior day like. Yeah,
yeah. And so I think that's great actually that all that happened.
yeah,
Um, I don't think that it's going to be an issue with these guys being able to handle it, but you do wonder about it. You know, as I say, I think Michigan State as a team, as a program, has handled it about as well as you could hope for. But it is worth mentioning. Like, does that become something that those guys sort of feel? Because you don't want that. You just want them playing, right?
yeah, right. Yeah, and some level, I'm like, you know, you've tied the record unless they really care that it's against Indiana, because that's the previous. I mean, those guys
I
weren't
don't
alive.
think the
They
team.
weren't even alive when Bobby
Right,
and I was coaching, right? I mean,
that's
it's kind of like for them, it's ancient
that's right.
history.
It's ancient history, exactly.
Yeah.
That stuff, I think, that's fun for us,
Yeah.
but I
Right.
think for the players, it doesn't mean a thing.
Yeah. And we know he's going to get another win. I mean, no matter how doom and gloom and black pilled you are, this is not. I mean, the Michigan State's not done winning this year. They're going to win some more games. So it's not when and where it happens. I don't know. I don't think people are too worried about it. But I think, you know, before the season, I think you could have argued, well, you don't know when this would happen because I
Right.
don't think we were expecting this sort of record coming into
You
this
weren't
game.
necessarily expecting 10-2. Yeah.
Not, no, certainly not this early. And then a pretty clean non-conference schedule as well.
Yeah.
So the second key to the game is transition. It's oftentimes one of the keys. Indiana has trouble hanging on to the ball. This would be a great game for Michigan State to get that going. They've really struggled, I think, getting the fast break going the last three games against former Pac-12 teams. Maybe this is a time they can get it really rolling against Indiana at home.
That's so weird too, because if you'd asked me before the season what Big Ten teams are going to be easiest to run against, Washington was, but
Yeah,
I would have said, well, three of those four. I would have figured UCLA would do a good job of limiting it because I think Mick Cronin is that kind of coach. But I would have figured, oh, the other three, these guys don't see Michigan State. The players don't have any familiarity. It's just a one-shot deal, playing them all one time. Uh, they'll they'll be able to run it. It did not work out that way. Um, but a lot of the other teams in the league, the old line Big Ten teams, Michigan State has been able to run effectively against, more so than a lot of other recent Big Ten seasons. Indiana strikes me as a team where that equation might be in play. Um, they play fast. They're not particularly disciplined or together defensively. As you say, they also cough the ball up a little bit. They're not a good offensive rebounding team, so you'd hope Michigan State could get some clean defensive rebounds. All the things that we look at that tend to lead to them being able to get into transition. That's what you would think might result in this game.
all right, so the third key to the game is the boards. Again, this is oftentimes something we talk about, and the thing we talk about a lot too is how well is Michigan State going to do on the defensive end of the boards against a team that doesn't offensive rebound well? Are they going to be able to clean that up? Which, of course, helps the transition game quite a bit.
Yeah,
And then also, hopefully, in the offensive end, they get some good stuff going as well.
the thing about Indiana is you look at this team, and man, they shouldn't be this bad.
Yeah, you would think with Renew and Ballo up there, right? And
That
Baco.
alone, and McBacco,
Yeah.
they've got some. Trey Galloway throws his body around. I mean, they've got some guys that you would think on paper, yeah, this should be a decent rebounding team. They haven't been. That's scary because we've seen Michigan State be in
Yeah.
those kind of matchups with teams that haven't done well over the course of the season and then struggle a little bit in terms of the defensive rebounding. So this is another one, just like several of the games lately, where you look at it, you think this has got to be an area where Michigan State has a decisive advantage. They had it yesterday against Oregon. Need to do it again.
Yeah. And it'd be nice for him to bring it the entire game, whereas
Yep,
Oregon was really just the second half, and then
40
they just
minutes.
clamped
Right,
down. Yeah.
right.
Fourth key to the game is turnovers. Michigan State has been a little loose with the ball, but Indiana, has doesn't really pressure much. They don't generate a lot of turnovers, so it's going to be all Michigan State's fault if they get them.
Yeah, and yesterday again, Oregon um, will put a little more pressure on you than say Indiana will. But I thought the first half, when Michigan State had the turnover problems, they really weren't pressuring. It was the second half where they brought a little more full court stuff, and that's where Michigan State was much better. So go figure. The problem would be, uh, can Michigan State avoid making its own mistakes rather than, again, they're not likely to be in a position where IU is really forcing much. Um, but MSU has to be solid. That's you, having excessive amounts of turnovers, really good way to allow IU to hang around.
And the fifth and final key of the game, as we kind of alluded to before, is health. Michigan State was missing Fears and Booker, and Akins was a bit under the weather as well, I guess. I assume it's all the same bug. So hopefully that those guys are back and that there aren't any new afflictions coming to this game.
Yeah, it's funny. You just never know with this stuff, right? So you hope that Fears and Booker and Akins are all better by Tuesday, which seems reasonable to expect.
Yeah.
But um, but who else might it spread to? That's the danger, right? I think we're probably not out of the woods for, well, you're the doctor. What would you say? Another week? You'd figure it would have burned through whoever it was going to get,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, college, I don't know what it is, but college kids, they're all around each other. It's like a cesspool, sort of like a high school or so. There's plenty of other things they could get as well. So
True.
I mean, I guess the most important thing when it comes to health, and I think we saw this with Oregon to some respect, when you have a roster as deep and as experienced as they are, guys
Yeah.
used to playing minutes, you're asking people to play an extra 5, 8 minutes, maybe. It's not that big a deal, right? So it's not like we're asking guys who are playing normally 32 minutes now playing 39. So unless it hits everybody, we should be okay.
But I would say, I agree with that. But the other end of it is Michigan State. I think is, and this doesn't get talked about a lot, but I do think it's a well calibrated team. So it's true that you've got guys that can step up, but there are certain elements certain guys bring that maybe others don't.
Sure.
And if you're missing them, so yesterday, for example, I some of it, Michigan State's transition stuff was due to the way Oregon played, but some of it, in my opinion, was due to not having Jeremy Fears out there. I also think the first half struggles that they had in dealing with Shellstead, that's an assignment that very clearly, I think from opening tip, Jeremy Fears would have had. Would he
Yeah.
have done a better job? Well, we'll never know. I think there's a reasonable assumption he might have. So they were missing that, right? If you're missing somebody else, I mean, I just think of, if you were missing Jackson Kohler, well, that's a huge part of what they do as a rebounding group, right?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, other guys can play those minutes, but are they going to be as effective? I don't know.
Yeah.
So that's what I would worry about. I think in general, you're right. They're built to withstand some of that, but I'd sure rather have all 10 guys available. I know
Well,
that much.
no question that's the case. That's always the case. But yeah, at least you can sustain a game or two where you have to have kind of weird lineups. And in
Yeah.
this sort of game, I feel like it's weird talking about Indiana this way, but I think you could have a deficiency and still be okay in this sort of game
Well,
versus,
that's true.
like Purdue's coming to town or you play Michigan or something like
Yeah,
that. So
that's
anyway.
true. Yeah.
All right. So this is we were commenting about this before, but it's kind of hot and heavy here. The games every 3 to 4 days, all the way through to the Big Ten tournament, pretty much. I was trying to figure out the schedule for us. And there's not much rest. It's going to be playing straight through. I think this is a team equipped to do well, and this is the hard part of the season as far as we look. But this is not one of the harder games. It's probably one of the easier games that they've got left. Maybe at Iowa would be an easier game, but this is probably one of the easier games left in the Big Ten season at least.
On paper, for
Yeah,
sure. If you're looking at the record, you're looking at the general impression of the quality of the opponent. Yes, at home against Indiana would be probably the easiest because although Iowa I don't think is quite as good as Indiana, that's also a game that's on the road.
right.
So yeah, I would agree with that. And then you look at Indiana just kind of being in disarray. Um, but as we've talked about with the Big Ten all year, you could say all that, and yet you look at Indiana's team, you say, well, Mbako, Ballo, Renault, they've got some guys. And on
They've
a
got
given
guys. Yeah.
day, if it's humming, you could have a problem. So there's no true soft touch in the Big Ten. You're going to have to play well to win this game.
Well, I guess we'll leave it there. We'll be back, and so I know we were planning having Dom on sooner. Like I mentioned, there's a game every 3 days or so. So it's like we're going to try and squeeze them in. We might even try a live show. We'll see how that works. So if you're not on YouTube, head on over. It's YouTube at TFFINOTS. That way you can find the YouTube page, or certainly can type in the Final Fours on the schedule. You'll find our show as well. Make sure you subscribe so that if we do a live show, you're notified. You can put I think click the bell to get notification. You can show how savvy I am with YouTube. But check out that. Make sure you're ready for it. So I think that'd be later this week, but we'll kind of play everything by ear. We're gonna continue to evolve and sort of continue to try and make the show better, still get you the quality content with just different avenues and maybe better. So we'll see. So I guess until next time, the Final Four is not on the schedule. Go Green.